Welcome to the podcast, Anthony.
Thank you very much for inviting me on.
No, you're welcome. And well, no doubt we'll get around during our chat today about your involvement in travel. But the thing I like to ask everyone at the start is, what's your earliest memories of travel?
Mine would be going on holiday with my parents, probably 1968-ish. Round about then, I was 5 or 6, and we flew TAP to somewhere in the Algarve. I've only got 2 recollections of it. One is I seemed to pick up the language incredibly quickly. Literally in just a couple of days, and my parents would send me off to the shops to buy provisions, and I didn't seem to have to pay for anything. Friendly shopkeepers would tap me on the head and say, have this, have that. So of course my parents encouraged that enormously. Whether one would send a 4 or 5-year-old child off now to do shopping on their own is another matter, but in the late 60s it didn't seem to be a problem. And then my other memory was a small child taking my cricket bat off me and bursting into tears, which sadly was captured on 8mm film and then shown every Christmas to relatives. So that's my first memory of travel. Sunny times in Portugal.
Yeah, well, sounds like it. And I suppose the thing about it is, I mean, did you feel, thinking about it, that it kind of gave you an inkling of what you might be interested in the future, or was it something that happened gradually?
It certainly wasn't something I thought about at the time. I was probably going to be a footballer or something like that. I came into travel really quite late, I think 2017. I'd been running an English language school for international students before that, and I think got really sort of fascinated by where students had come from and their sort of cultures and everything else. So when the language school closed in 2017, it seemed a natural progression to, instead of them coming to me, for me to go to them, if you like. So that's how I got into travel.
So perhaps your early experience then got you interested in languages.
Yes. I was always quite good at French. I have to say I've got quite rusty now, and I do have a property in Normandy, so I've always loved France. I think one of the drawbacks with having a property abroad is that you stop traveling to other countries. So I got extremely familiar with Normandy, particularly the sort of Seine-Maritime area around Rouen and that sort of region. And it wasn't really till I got into travel as a career that I started traveling more widely.
So okay, so you also like languages, and you were in school for some time then. So what was so apart from being curious about where the students were coming from, did it make you think, well, there were certain places well that they made you, well, I'd actually love to go there?
Yes. We had a lot of students from South America, so that was always appealing. Although I haven't yet been there. My father's side of the family were tea planters in India, so that's again somewhere I've always wanted to go to, but until later this year. I haven't yet done so. And I've always sort of enjoyed the sort of stories of Marco Polo and all that sort of thing, traveling out east and the like. I don't have any connection to the writer Mary Kingsley, who explored quite vigorously in West Africa. But perhaps someday I will follow in her footsteps, either in West Africa or via the pen.
You've obviously taken travel pretty seriously very quickly, because not only have you been interested in where students come from, but you've actually got into helping people to travel.
Yes.
So how did that come about?
Well, it was a sort of natural progression. The language school closed quite quickly, and I was looking for, even slightly before then, for something else to do. And it just seemed a natural progression to get into travel, partly for myself, because I wanted to travel myself, and partly to help others take the sort of trips that I would like to take.
So did it feel a bit strange at start then, to sort of, it's almost like stepping from one side of the table. One day you were a traveler, and the next you were helping others.
Yes, it seems a bit like a sort of poacher turned gamekeeper to a certain extent. But I think it's very much a question of really just trying to help people. Possibly people don't want to do the same sort of travel that I would like to do, but there's such a wide range of travel that it's easy to sort of fit everything around.
So what sort of notable experience, what sort of notable requests have you come across your table that have sort of perhaps taken your surprise?
Well, my very first couple of inquiries as a travel agent were for people to transport their parents' ashes back to the Ganges, which wasn't quite what I got into travel for, but that was quite interesting. And then, and of course, like London buses, I had 3 of them all at once, and then I've never had one since. I then had a lovely honeymoon inquiry from a couple. The lady wanted to go to Antarctica, and the husband wanted to go to either the Seychelles or the Maldives. And I tried very hard to sort of accommodate both of them, but unfortunately, in the end, they decided that because their honeymoon requirements were so different, they weren't that well suited. So that fell flat on its face. But I thought that would have been an interesting honeymoon, sort of Seychelles and then down to Antarctica.
Yeah, that's quite a change of experience, isn't it? Yeah. I read an interesting article the other day about about the internet, and because I've always had an interest in the IT world, and one of the things that got talked about in the 1990s was that, well, the internet was going to end the the travel agency world as we know it, but of course it has done nothing of the sort. So I mean, how do you think how do you think things have changed since then, and can you sort of see sort of a natural progression going forward?
Well, I suppose maybe the biggest change is that the internet makes things much more reachable, and therefore we can be much more ambitious in our travel plans. I don't really see the internet as being a huge threat to travel agents. If a client wants a flight and a hotel, there's very little point, I think, in asking a travel agent to do that for you, unless, of course, you want the convenience of it, or perhaps the ability to speak to a real person on the phone, package travel regulations and that sort of thing. But simple trips, I think for travel agents, it's a bit like selling baked beans. It's not that interesting. I will sell baked beans if that's what people want to buy, and indeed have done, but I would much rather give them the full English breakfast where I provide everything for them, and really sort of encourage them to do things that they wouldn't be able to do on their own. And that's through a combination of both experience, knowledge, expertise, and of course the contacts that we build up as travel agents.
Do you think travelers today are very, do you think they're aware of what, say, travel agents and professionals can do for them, or is there kind of a legacy of?
I think there's, you're probably quite right. There is an element of legacy. And of course, we've got a former Minister of Transport or whatever it was calling us estate agents. So it shows the level of confusion. I think possibly travel agent is a slightly misleading term. I would much prefer the term travel consultant or something along those lines, because I think it emphasizes the fact that someone comes to consult with us, and it's not simply a buying and selling transaction. It's not a purchase off the shelf.
Yeah. Some of the most interesting conversations I have are interesting because there seems to be some sort of story behind it. Because in my profession, I'm interested in the world of travel, and I just wondered what your take on stories, because there was another article I read that sort of claimed, I'd love to get your take on it. It claimed that the under 30s, they only get their information from social media, and of course social media famously, it's all about the best experience for the people on whatever social platform they go on. So as a result, if they're leaning on it for travel choices, they're only getting popular travel choices. How do you feel about people who have just been given the popular?
Well, I think to a certain extent it depends on what people are looking for, and that's the beauty of the internet. You can look for pretty much anything. We do hear the occasional stories of maybe a coffee shop gets a bad review, so they will post something about, come and see why we have the worst coffee in London, and that drives people towards them. So I don't think it necessarily need be the best experiences. Quite often people might look for, why is something so bad, or why is something so challenging? So I think storytelling is very important in any marketing, and I think travel is something that naturally lends itself to stories. That there's always a story about a destination, about a hotel, and those stories will resonate with some people and not with others. So I think as a travel agent, stroke consultant, stroke travel marketer, that's what we're looking for. What sort of story will resonate with the type of people that we're trying to connect with? I was in Pamplona beginning of the year, and there was a statue in front of the hotel I was staying at, and I just happened to Google who it was. It was a doctor, a children's doctor, but he also was a keen photographer and writer, and he used to write lots of brochures and books about Pamplona, and as a result was sort of recognized by the city with this statue. So I mentioned this to the hotel manager, who said, we'd walk past that statue every day and had never paid any attention to it. And perhaps he should, because it's someone showing the love of the city and why people should enjoy it. And then I tried to buy one or two of his books in Pamplona, but absolutely no joy at all. Went around all the secondhand shops, new shops, nothing. Nobody had ever heard of him. That was a story that sort of resonated with me, but probably with absolutely nobody else. So I think that's an example. If I was selling Pamplona to myself, I would use the example of Mr. Arazuri, I think his name is. But to everybody else, it's completely irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, I guess it is to a certain extent, isn't it? I mean, history, maybe it's just my personal preference, but I love I love asking myself why places are there, and
Yes.
often history is very connected to travel. Um, I mean, you given one example there. I'll give you one briefly myself. I live in Devon, and I accidentally, on purpose, if you like, I decided to stop at most of the railway stations between the city of Exeter and the coastal town of Exmouth. And I should have written it down before we had our chat, but the place I stopped at had the smallest fishing village you can imagine, because everybody piles towards the coast. And there was two stories I read about the place. One, a man, he so loved his wife, he built a tower right on the front of the fishing village. It was an Italianate tower, and it stands out so much that you can see it from the other side of the estuary.
Right.
And the other famous resident, although you wouldn't say he's famous, he was infamous. He was a pirate in the time of, in the 1600s. He was obviously very successful because he eventually got caught, but he avoided the worst fate that was available to them at the time because he gave the local sheriff £500, which at the time was a significant sum
Yes.
of money. So can you see like a better use of history in terms of bringing travel to the world?
Yes, I think it's history and culture and these sorts of things are very important in bringing a destination to life and why people should visit it. I often use history in my own marketing or literature as well. I posted this morning about Pamplona and the effect that Ernest Hemingway had on that. So I think these connections with history, music, literature, and then of course food and wine, we can't leave those two out. They're all extremely important, and I think give reasons why people should want to visit a particular area.
And Ernest Hemingway was a prolific traveller of a kind.
Indeed, it was. Yes, yeah.
I think I read one of his books, which was kind of like it was an output of his experiences in World War One. It wasn't. I don't think it was a direct. All the characters seemed to be influenced by his own personal experiences.
Yeah.
So I think people are extremely extremely interesting, and often travel is related. I just finished a book about the three war leaders, and I was amazed by how much, like Roosevelt and Churchill, how much they had to travel to go anywhere, and it was quite extraordinary what they had to do to avoid danger, and they weren't fit individuals by any means. And the visualization of Churchill literally dropping at the bottom of a plane when he went to Moscow, and someone had to sort of hold his posterior while he was coming out of the plane. It just it uses your imagination, and I think that's quite a.
There's a lovely story about Churchill and Roosevelt in Marrakesh, and after their conference, Churchill saying to Roosevelt, "Right, we'll have to stay on here. You can't come to Marrakesh and not see the sunset." So they stayed on for a couple of days while Churchill painted, and poor Roosevelt was dragged around looking at sunsets and the like.
Yeah, so there's always time. There's always time for a bit of tourism, isn't there? Even
Indeed, there is, yeah.
In moments of crisis.
Yeah.
So I noticed that, as you alluded to, you like posting about various locations, and I noticed you've done some posting about a location in London. So is it safe to say that London is a has a special place for you, or is it one of many?
I would say it's probably one of many. Because I live in London, I tend to overlook it a bit, and which I think is a shame to a certain extent. Although, of course, generally speaking, I'm trying to encourage people to go abroad, because although I do a little bit of UK selling, I didn't do a great deal. So yes, London is an extraordinary city. There is so much happening, so much to see and do. I was talking about Brick Lane, which has foods from pretty much all over the world. So do you even need to travel? You just need to go to London, and you have everything laid out for you. But then I've also posted that food never tastes as good as when it is in its local destination. So I think, have your paella in Borough Market and then pop over to Valencia to see how it's really done.
I think you're absolutely right. The Barolo didn't taste anything like it tasted when I was in northern Italy.
Yes.
You just couldn't recreate it for some reason.
I have heard that in many cases, our European friends just send over the rubbish to us and keep the best for themselves.
Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I think there's an element of psychology linked to travel, isn't there? I think generally people are going, well, they're going to relax, or they're going. Sometimes they go for business too. But well, of course, there's a new kind of business now, isn't there? What they call pleasure, isn't there?
Indeed, yeah.
A lot of companies want their employees to be people of the world more, and
it's something I promote a lot. Yes, I can't say it's taken up that much in the UK, whereas I think in the US it's extremely popular. But it's definitely an emerging trend, and I think agents should try and make the most of it.
Yes. Well, I was talking to a lady in an African country, and I was amazed that like how many Arabian visitors they were getting to the area. So it's kind of happening quite a lot, isn't it? We don't obviously see it. I mean, do you think sometimes people mask, sort of leave certain destinations out because maybe the story of past times lingers on? Do you notice an element of that going on?
I suppose people are sort of, for example, still worried about going to Tunisia because there have been incidents there. So yes, that there can be an element of, I don't want to go there because I'm not sure it's going to be safe. Sri Lanka, of course, has also been criticized, has been labeled as unsafe, but has been safe for a very long time. And I think most visitors who have been have said that they felt extremely safe there. So there are quite a number of places on the Home Office don't go there list, which are really very safe indeed. Another example is Mindanao in the Philippines. And certainly when the previous president, I think it was Duterte, was there and his hometown was Davao, that was an extremely safe city because if anyone misbehaved there, they got dealt with very severely. So I think there is a problem with reputation, either through our own perceptions or alternatively through a sort of government restriction.
Yeah, well, two stories that really struck me was that I'd read and watched lots of stories about Colombia, yet when I spoke to people from Colombia, the picture was the complete opposite. It had been decades of stability. It's a popular destination for US teenagers, and and the pictures I've seen of it, it's a beautiful place, and the kind of trips that people are trying to get people to go on there. Like if you were to go to Peru and you wanted to go and see the land of the Incas, well, the Colombians have their own version of that, but it's not generally known. So I just think there's quite a lot of stories that perhaps get missed. I almost feel like South America and Africa particularly are undersold destinations. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Africa tends to be seen more as a sort of safari destination. I know it's also got a very good beach offering as well, but it doesn't seem to be sold much other than as those two. As you say, they've still got wonderful places to go to. North Africa, sort of Morocco is extremely popular. Algeria and Tunisia don't have that same situation. Although, of course, Tunisia used to be incredibly popular. I think one of our biggest destinations. So it does show how things can change in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, I mean, a lady showed me a video that a company called Condé Nast did of one of the Central African countries, and it demonstrated extraordinary beauty. It wasn't just about safaris. You could live homesteads, go on boat rides on Great Lakes, go on hikes, do a bit of cycling. Lots of very normal things.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And also some very unusual choices. It just made me think, well, going back to that story I'd read about, people only being attracted towards popular places. I almost think like, well, you remember Walt Disney famously said, didn't he? I look at what everybody else does and then go in the opposite direction. That was his mantra. I mean, as a kid, my parents took me to a busy place in Greece, Athens, and the Acropolis is a spectacular ancient place to visit. It was well chosen. It's got spectacular views. But even in the 1970s, there were more people than ruins.
Yes. Yeah.
But my parents were wise enough to also go on trips to places like Corinth and that were relatively untouched, and I think there's so many opportunities to discover new stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And possibly that is another role for travel agents, is to ensure that people are aware of these destinations and can get to them and enjoy them.
So I thought I'd change a little tack now, because the experience of the traveller whilst they're travelling has changed enormously over the decades. I had a few trips around a few aircraft museums because there's a lot of former Concorde planes scattered about the UK.
Yeah.
But one just east of Scotland also had a Dan Air aircraft. And I remember as a kid thinking, because there's pictures of me at the London airport in the early 60s, and it was a very exciting place to be in those days, because you could get super close to all the action. But when I looked at this aeroplane, and I thought, well, I used to go on holiday on one of these, but it looked so fragile compared with the Concorde just sat a few hundred meters away from it. I mean, it looked like somebody bashed it together in a shed the previous day. Yeah, at the time, it was regarded as the the latest technology. But in terms of the way people travel today, there's kind of been a perception, for a long time that travel is not always an amazing experience. You just have. There's always stories, isn't there? Because you only get to hear of stories of problems. You don't get to hear the success stories. I was fortunate to be a Heathrow Terminal 5 tester when they were doing their final checks, and it was amazing to go around an empty edge of the airport. But of course, the first thing that happened when they opened it was loads of luggage got lost because the machine broke, didn't it, on the first or second day. But these things do get sorted out. Do you find a lot of passengers are nervous or easily stressed out? And if they are, what sort of things do you do to help them?
In my sort of relatively early days in travel, I had some clients who traveled out to the Dominican Republic, and the place was hit by a hurricane, and the hotel was evacuated, and they spent a couple of nights in I think it was the basement of a school, and I was terribly apologetic. Nothing I could do about it, of course, but they loved it. They said, it's a bit like being in the Blitz, and we all got on fantastically well, and there was loads of rum and everything else, blah, blah, blah. So I think in many cases, passengers are aware that there might be issues that are beyond control and are okay with it. I was in Padua earlier this year, again, lightning storm, which knocked out the electricity and water supplies, so we had no lights. Bathroom wasn't working. I had left my room to find out what was happening, and of course then couldn't get back in because my key wouldn't work to get back in. And there was a mix of reaction between the other people in the hotel. Others were, this is absolutely fine. It's nature. There's nothing we can do about it. The other thing was that the hotel had flooded. So the whole of the ground floor was sort of about 6 inches in water. But there was a tour group, and the tour operator, the tour guide, was almost hysterical with rage, saying, this isn't good enough. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And this poor lady was saying, there's nothing I can do. We're waiting for people to come. I suppose the tour guide had his job to do. He had to get his people, I think, to Rome or somewhere like that on a coach, and they were annoyed that they couldn't have breakfast and they couldn't shower and everything else. So I think some people will accept that things are going to go wrong. Others expect everything to go smoothly, and they're not going to accept any excuse.
Yeah. Well, one of the most interesting experiences I had was with a company that hardly anybody will have heard of, because they don't really market themselves at all. It's all word of mouth. And the thing that really impressed me about them was that they always sent their tour. They personally picked all their tour managers and guides, and it didn't matter where the trip was going. Those people had to do the journey on their own, prior to taking any real customers. And you couldn't tell how much of a difference that made, but I'm sure it did make a difference. And as you say, it didn't guarantee that things would go to plan. We did a trip to New Zealand, and we didn't go straight there. We went to Los Angeles and then to Hawaii. And of course, because of all the time zones that you were crossing, in order for us to make our next appointment on time, we had to leave Hawaii at like 1 or 2 in the morning to carry on to New Zealand. And of course, the coach didn't show up on time, and the office was closed. I don't know what magic what magic dust they had to use. I mean, there was some delay, but we did get to the airport on time. So I think a lot of it, isn't it? It's down to the it's down to the people running the tour, isn't it? To how resourceful are these and these people? And I think that really impressed me, the fact that they didn't get flustered, and it just had a very calming effect on the whole.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a really important element of travel, isn't it? Is how you react to situations as opposed to what actually happens.
And of course, one of the great reasons for using a travel agent rather than booking it yourself, because the travel agent has got the connections to smooth everything over if something does go wrong. Things do go wrong. I mean, flights are delayed all of the time, and sometimes you miss your connection through no fault of your own. And if you've got someone, you can just pick up the phone and say, "Help! What do I do?" That makes the whole thing so much less stressful. And even if you don't need to do so, you've still got the reassurance that there's someone at the end of the phone.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Do you think sometimes people go on journeys, but they don't really get the essence of a country because their trips are too organized? Do you think that happens?
One of the things I say about organized trips is that the organizers need to provide time for people to actually take it all in. If I'm on a found trip, I'm usually rushed through everything very, very quickly. And for understandable reasons, they want to show us as much as is possible. But you don't really get to see what you're looking at. You don't get to experience it. And I think there is a danger with organized tours that because you need to see everything and you've only got a limited amount of time, that you really do rush through, and you don't have time just to sit in a coffee shop and just watch the world go by. You don't have time to linger a little bit longer than you would like to over lunch. So when I'm preparing tours, I always try and ensure that people only say one or two things a day. And it might be a case of, well, let's leave out, let's take a ludicrous example. Let's leave out the Eiffel Tower because you're going to spend 5 hours queuing to go up it. Let's go have a 5-hour lunch instead. Obviously, everybody's going to want to see the Eiffel Tower. But if you've only got 40, 45, 50 hours, 60 hours, do you want to spend 5 hours queuing to see it? So I think, again, it's a question of what your client wants. But I think it's important to say, that there is a limit to how much your brain can process. And if you want to really see it, you need to slow down. Maybe see less, but see it better.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I've seen fellow passengers fall asleep because they had too full a day. And I think, well, it's a real shame because they've traveled the same journey as me, and they won't be able to tell me what their experience was like at dinner in the evening.
Yes.
Because they slept through all of it.
I think, again, there's this problem that when we're talking about organized tours, we concentrate too much on just the one sense, the sight. You see things. But of course, we've got another 4 senses that we should be engaging with. And I think it's very important to just slow down and say, right, let's experience everything. And if we have to take some things out, we take some things out.
Well, I think that's, when I asked you about, your early experiences, when I think of mine, I don't think of the sights. I think of the sounds. Like my parents took me to Italy. I remember the sound of the traffic. I remember the sounds that I heard at a restaurant. The smell of the food. The sight was the very last thing that comes to mind. So I think maybe we you say we're sometimes a bit too quick. Perhaps we undersell the parts that will make them remember the. Because I think do you think we kind of evolve as travelers? You know, because I think, you know, because my parents were like package holiday people, where they traveled across Europe before it got joined up into a single travel zone. I think that was the reason why they took to flying, because they only had to deal with passports once. You know, they went by train and they got stopped about 6 times on their way to Italy. I just think that yes, you know, you can evolve as a traveler, and I think because I did so many package holidays, I'm more of an independent traveler now. I've gone, you know, pendulum has swung violently in the other direction. How's that for you?
Well, for me, most certainly, yes. I think as you travel more, you want to do more because you see how possible it is. Package holidays are great if you just want to sit, relax, and do nothing. But there comes, you know, you're in your all-inclusive resort, and then you think actually it'd be quite nice to go out into the town and experience a local restaurant, and then you want to go further and further. And once you start with that inquiring mind, it's a question of where do you go? Because you can go anywhere. And that's one of the great strengths of the internet, is that it's so easy to research, both before you leave, but also when you're there, you can research. I'm also a great believer in not over-researching. I think as a traveler, we need to keep some element of surprise. And if you know exactly what you're going to do on exactly 9 o'clock, I'm going to be here, 10 o'clock, I'm going to be there, 11 o'clock, there's then no surprise. And if there is a surprise, it's something that knocks that schedule out of sync, and you go, oh God, I'm going to be late. So I think the more we travel, the more we evolve. And I think we get much more ambitious about how we travel. We might take a few more risks, maybe take that train journey instead of flying. It's a lot longer, but we're going to enjoy it much more. And we want to try new experiences. So hopefully we will continue to evolve as travelers and be constantly opening up new experiences.
I do hope so, because you know, I'm kind of an obsessive planner, but actually, as you say, the things that I remember most are the ones were the occasions when it was unplanned.
Yes.
You know, I didn't have anything to do, so I was wondering what to do, and I just turned left instead of right, and learned the most interesting. You know, you can learn the most interesting things just by being spontaneous.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, can you give me any examples of where you've had a spontaneous moment and been like taken aback?
I was in Barcelona a little bit earlier in the year, and which isn't one of my favorite places, I have to say, but we decided to go to Girona by train, and pretty much as we were getting towards the station, we had a change of heart and said, right, no, we'll go to Tarragona instead. Same sort of distance, but we went to Tarragona. I thought it was a wonderful place. Ended up in the Forum. There was an old gentleman there playing saxophone, just a busker, but it just seemed to go with the whole atmosphere. Early drinks in the Forum, nice bit of tapas, sun going down, and then of course we had to rush back to catch our train. But it's the sort of thing I hadn't planned, but I remember it quite well, much more than pushing our way through the crowds in Barcelona.
Yeah, it's a funny thing about crowds, isn't it? I don't know what it is? Do you think people feel safer following the crowds? I know when I see the crowds, well, there's usually something related to it.
Yeah.
The reason I think I'm there, but actually the most interesting things are the streets that the crowd don't want to walk along.
Yes, I mean there are times when being part of the crowd is fantastic. A football match, for example, much better to be within a big crowd that's reacting rather than on your own, supporting your side as they lose yet again, as I often feel. But for me, if I see a restaurant with a big queue outside, that might say it's a great restaurant, but I will go to somewhere else. But I do sort of look at these big crowds outside or big queues outside restaurants and think, why are you doing that? Why would you queue for half an hour or an hour to go and have a meal when there's plenty of other options just around the corner? But then maybe the reputation of the chef or whatever is such that you have to be seen in there.
Yes, yeah, I guess so. It made me think of a book I've just picked up about the writer Ian Fleming. Of course, people always think of him as being a writer, but there's a lot more depth to the guy. And I've only opened the second page, and it's come up with a quip. He's obviously been to France a lot of times, because he said, if you ever find yourself hungry in France and are in need of a restaurant, just ask a fat policeman.
Yes.
And, that was his his answer to hunger. But it was an interesting observation. So, about continuing the travel theme, do you see that there are things that work well and things that don't work well? Can you think of any examples where travel could be better, and things that are going on that seem to be working really well at the moment?
I suppose one of the big questions that was being asked immediately after the pandemic was, do we build back better, or do we build back and then get better? With the whole sustainable travel argument. And I do see some signs that travel is getting much better, but also signs that we've sort of gone back to doing what we were doing before. And we're just thinking about, let's squeeze as much money out of a destination as we possibly can. I don't think there's yet enough, I don't know what you'd call it, publicity or marketing about the difference good, sustainable or regenerative travel can make, and how we as passengers or travelers can be a part of that. Because I think the whole question of sustainable travel is something that should involve all three parties: the destination, the supplier, and the traveler. It shouldn't just fall onto one. If I sort of think of some of those very, very luxurious destinations in the Philippines, which are seemingly situated in the middle of the most abject poverty, you think this can't really be right, that within a few hundred yards, you've got an enormous amount of wealth. And then people who are scratching around for a living, they don't have electricity, don't have running water. It must be the same in parts of Africa, and again, India, perhaps. So I think these are some of the challenges that travel is going to have to face at some point. And indeed, the whole issue of emissions and carbon and everything else, some of that is being dealt with extremely well. Others, you sort of look at a hotel that says, we're doing our bit by not washing your towels every day. They need to do more than that, and we need to be asking and expecting that they do more than that, but we need to play our own part too.
I've seen some very good programs, mostly Australia or Asia, and I was impressed with them because, well, I'll give you a couple of examples. There was a homestead in Australia where everything was being grown for the roadside restaurant,
Yeah.
and the chef was saying, we got 26 varieties of lettuce, for example, and no one meal therefore is the same as the next. But of course, you can only have so many visitors. They had a good recycling system, so nothing was left to waste. There was another example about some remote islands. It might have been off Indonesia. There were basically islands that were at risk in some respect or another to rising seawater or overfishing, and there were some very good, some very good projects. But of course, the thing that you notice, as good as these projects are, the thing that was constant between all these examples was that there was only so many visitors that could visit at a time, because if it's more than that, it cannot be described as being sustainable.
Yeah.
So I wonder what your thoughts on how can we make tourism sustainable to the masses? Are we asking too much?
I think again, this is where the industry needs to educate its consumers a bit better. People will go to the popular destinations because that's where they're told that they should go, and that's where all the deals are, and et cetera, et cetera. We need to be able to sort of spread it out much more. So, if people are going to Barcelona, within an hour's train journey, they can be in Tarragona, where they'll get pretty much the same experience, but with much fewer people. Hotel prices are, I think, between 30 and 40% less. And you sort of think of all these people who, come to their travel agent and say, "Can you knock 10 quid off this price?" And you think, well, yes, I can. I can knock 50 quid off if you just go an hour further away. But they, no, I have to be here. I have to be here. So I think there's quite an element of education, and also pushing people towards the experience of being in a destination rather than just the Instagram photo of wherever they are. But it's not an easy topic. I'm not sure I really necessarily agree with tourist taxes, and I know that pretty much everywhere else does them, and I understand the need for it. But I think it gets to a point, particularly when taxes are getting quite high, that you sort of think, is this really designed to encourage tourists or to send them away? And the people that it's encouraging are those who can afford it, not those who might necessarily benefit from it. So I'm in two minds about the sorts of strategies at the moment that are being used to deter people from going to a destination.
Well, it seems like that there are certain hotspots, aren't there, everywhere? There was an example of it might have been Ibiza, where a local person was being interviewed, and they said, well, you don't mind visitors, but when 19,000 show up on cruise ships and hit the main town all at once, is that that's not really sustainable. And when you allow such high quotas of people to visit a single place, it doesn't just make a place busy, but it also affects the economy. In fact, it overly weights it in favor of the visitor and not the people who actually live in the places. And many people on the Balearic Islands, or at least the ones they interviewed, that is, were saying, it's getting increasingly too expensive to live on our own island. Another area that seems to be overlooked, which I thought was a little bit shocking, was that some countries now are struggling with the supply of fresh water. And one such island, which is considered to be very idyllic, is the island of Bali.
Yep.
And you hear nothing but, beautiful stories of people going there as a destination. It's become a very popular place for nomads, which is a very popular thing to be now. So many countries now are altering their visa systems to accommodate people that want to stay 3 months or more at a time. But Bali, as if you look at the heat map, is at danger levels when it comes to supply of fresh water, and it's not because it can't cope. What it can't cope with is the ratio between visitors and residents.
Yes, I think that's going to be a big problem, and also just being able to supply the right amount of fresh local food for small islands where there are heavy tourist populations, because the hotels are in a much stronger position when it comes to buying up all the local food, and of course can get it from wherever they want, whereas local people find that they're getting less good food. But there's also some fantastic sustainable initiatives going on in Bali. There's I think it's a settlement called Kaura, which the travel industry effectively repaired their drainage system so they could grow their rice, but then they started building greenhouses so that the women could grow local food. That gave jobs to the women and gave them parity with the men. And now they're supplying that food, but where they're supplying it to the hotels, because that's where the market is. So you sort of think, okay, what about the local people who aren't working in these places?
Well, food production is big business. I'm very interested to follow, because large airlines, they must have food production problems, because I noticed that one or two of the large Arabian airlines, they have their own laboratories, and they grow a lot of their own food in massive volumes. And some of the YouTubers I've watched, they've been allowed to go and look at how they manage the operation. I mean, I didn't imagine that you could grow that amount of food, on the airport site. They employed masses of people.
Yes.
But there again, some of these airlines are carrying millions of people on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It's like an island. They've created little islands of food productions. Which is no connection to their location whatsoever. So, what do you think the future of travel holds? Are we doing more on the plus side? Are there things that we could be doing better? How do you think? What do you think it's going to look like in 50, 100 years' time?
I'd like to know what it's going to be doing in 5 years' time, but I think what we'll probably see are lots more sort of trends arising. So we've got sustainable travel, we've got leisure, we've got experiential travel, wellness travel, any type of activity, there is travel associated with it. And I think that will probably continue. But I also see the package travel type of operation also expanding, because people do just want to leave their front door, get to the airport, land at the hotel, and do nothing else. I see there's a huge, almost like a cruise ship type experience of a hotel in Mexico. I think it's 1,500 rooms, and it's sort of divided into 4 independent units. And it is, you've got absolutely no reason to leave the resort at all. because everything you could possibly want is there. And I think there may be sort of an increasing number of that type of operation, a sort of pile it up high and sell it cheap type thing, except it's not that cheap. But the sort of idea that you can just leave your front door, check into your hotel room, and then do nothing. Everything is done for you. It's a sort of travel that fills me with horror, but particularly for families, I think it must be terrific just to say, that's it, we're here, you can do this, 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 and this. We needn't have to worry about you, get on and do it. Yes, this restaurant does have chicken nuggets and pasta, which of course, if you're a parent, you're always worrying whether your children are going to be able to eat any foreign food. So I think that will continue to grow as well.
And is there anything you would like to see?
I would like to see more emphasis on areas that are much harder to get to at the moment. Some of the sort of less popular areas of the world having the opportunity to have tourism benefit them, hopefully in a way that benefits and sustains them and doesn't take away from them. I've mentioned the Philippines a few times. That's a favorite destination of mine. I think it doesn't benefit from a great deal of UK tourism. It gets fantastic tourism from countries that are nearer to it. But I think if they were able to have the numbers from the UK coming over, and if they were able to manage it in a more sustainable way, that would be terrific. And there are some resorts which are amazingly sustainable, really do take care of their environment and the people around it. But there's still far too many that I think that are just extracting what they can at whatever cost to their local environment.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That there's incredible diversity, but of course that you have to feel that you need to be mindful, don't you? If you make it something overly accessible, it might lose the very thing or the very experience that you want to provide.
Yes, I sort of look at countries like Bhutan, which have a very high tourist tax, and you think, okay, I understand why you're doing that, and you want to limit the numbers for very good reasons, but you're effectively shutting out people who may well benefit from that because they can't afford to. And so this is why I have this sort of rather ambivalent attitude towards restricting numbers, particularly if we're going to restrict it purely on the basis of cost and price.
Well, I mean, over the years, I've been privileged to meet people who've been totally unconcerned or have had no fear or inhibitions to go visit places that most ordinary people would never consider in 1,000 years. A couple of examples: a lady, she went out to Mongolia because she wanted to see wild horses in the wild. I mean, it took a tremendous amount of time to get there. She took some wonderful pictures of the main city of Ulaanbaatar, which looked like a place that Marco Polo might have visited. It looked very unique, and I'm sure it's undiscovered and not on too many people's bucket list.
My sister-in-law did exactly the same thing. I think she went for a few weeks and then liked it so much that she went back, and very much for a sort of local homestay type of experience. Again, taking lots of pictures, which she exhibited in Darkest Hackney. So yes, there's a lot more that we can do if we want to.
And of course, a way to perhaps to persuade or enlighten people is to write about it. And of course, this is one thing that you also like doing, which is kind of a well, how would you describe it? Copywriting doesn't seem to describe it enough. So do tell us a little bit about it.
I sort of think of it as a mix between travel marketing and travel copywriting. We often talk in marketing about the sort of hero's journey, and how you need to place your customer in the position of the hero, and the marketer as the guide that helps the hero get to wherever they want to get to. Travel writing, I think, is slightly different. There, the writer is the hero. I sort of like to occupy a space between the two. So I find quite a lot of travel writing quite not dull, but it doesn't sort of really resonate with me, because it is about what the writer is doing, and you're looking at it through the eyes of the writer. Whereas travel copywriting is much more about trying to look at it through the eyes of the traveler that you want to inspire to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is quite a challenge, because you need to sort of establish who that traveler is, what it is that they're going to want to see. It may be that you want to persuade them to go and see something that they don't want to see. Someone might not want to go and see Auschwitz, for example, but probably should if they're in that area. So you might want to persuade someone that you don't want to do it, but you should, and these are the reasons that you should. So I enjoy both travel writing and travel copywriting, but they are two very different disciplines with very different ends in mind.
So it sounds then that when you are placing your shoes in the into that of the traveller, you almost have to imagine a particular kind of traveller rather than just any old kind of traveller, because I guess we're all different, aren't we?
Yeah. Yes. I always think it's best to think of just one. There's always more than one, but if you just think of just one and write for that, and keep it relatively simple, then I think you can come up with some attractive writing that people will say, gosh, yes, I'd like to go and visit there.
Yes. Do you find when writing that it gives you a degree of artistic license, that you don't have to stay in your lane, so to speak?
Yes, but probably I shouldn't. But there is a danger that it becomes too self-indulgent, and instead of writing for the traveler, I'm writing for myself. And I do fall into that trap from time to time. But I suppose as the author, you can, to a certain extent, do whatever you like. I can write. I don't ask anyone to read.
Yeah.
Hopefully they do, and they enjoy what they're reading.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I almost think, like we were talking about the surprises that can happen. Do you think you? Well, I mean, the best fiction writers, you think of like Agatha Christie or anybody like that. Their purpose always seems to me to take you along a certain path, and then by accident they throw in something or somebody that totally throws you off, either off the scent or produces an accidental situation.
Yeah. I think with travel writing and travel marketing, you need to be a little bit more cautious there, because we don't want a situation where your traveler suddenly needs to find his inner Tom Cruise to get out of an awkward situation. He doesn't want to go down an alleyway and have to beat up 10 thugs. So I think it's sort of trying to provide interest, but without saying to the reader, this is a step too far for you. This is something that you can do. It's not difficult. You can do it, and you should do it, because whatever the reason might be.
Yeah, I suppose it's understanding the limits, isn't it, of the potential reader.
Yeah. But I was reading about a travel photographer who specializes in taking photographs of extreme mountain climbs. Now there you probably would want a lot of danger and everything else, because you're writing to a very niche audience of thrill seekers. And he finds that the people who reads his stuff and enjoy it are not necessarily climbers, but people who are thrill seekers. Whereas Mr. and Mrs. I'm about to retire are probably not going to want to read about dangling from a mountain and feeling the rope give.
No, probably not. So how do you think the written word, how that mixes in a marketing sense to what people naturally like to see alongside it, which is video and sound?
Yes.
Where do you see it sitting in all that?
I keep hearing that our attention span is diminishing and that we all want to just consume things in little nuggets. I'm not sure that I agree with that at all. I think there's still plenty of room for well-written content that people are going to want to read. I think because we are being told that people want just these little nuggets, people are producing it. And also, social media does make it much easier to produce. So you get people who are less capable of writing interesting material, producing material that isn't interesting, so people don't read it. Pictures tell 1,000 words. I think imagery is very important. Video, again, is very important. I do feel, however, that for a video to be successful, it needs to be shorter rather than longer. Maybe that's where our attention span is less good, unless the video has a really good element of storytelling behind it. Writing, I think, can get that idea of a story going much faster, and so hooks people in better. But yeah, any means of getting your message across, so long as it's well told, is what we need.
Yeah.
In order
So
to
it sounds like the written word then kind of lends itself more to narration.
Probably, yes. I mean, I think one of the big threats to the written word is of course AI, and removing the element of individuality. Unfortunately, I keep seeing more and more examples of AI being used to produce a sort of almost language that is too high flown and doesn't have the sort of the nitty gritty, the stone in your shoe type of content that perhaps people really need to see. So I think the next few years will be interesting in seeing just how content develops, whether we are going to recognize that there are limits to automation and that there is still a need for human creativity, or whether it simply becomes automated and we will just follow along.
Well, I hope not, because my dabbling with AI, I think, well, it's amusing, but you can always, at the moment, I can tell when it's not human.
Yes, yeah, because at the moment it doesn't have the ability to feel, it doesn't have emotions. If it is able to do that, then I think us poor writers are going to struggle. But travel for me is a very emotional subject, and AI might be able to reproduce how many swimming pools and how many bars and how many whatever it is that a hotel or a town has, but it won't tell you how you feel when you taste that first Negroni at 6 o'clock in the evening in your hotel, overlooking the pool as the sun comes down. If it does that, time for me to retire.
Well, I hope that doesn't happen ever, because I think one thing about interacting with other people is that we think in a very spontaneous sort of way.
Yes.
This is why I like these sorts of conversations we're having now is because whilst we are expressing and formulating ideas, we're also in the back of our minds seeing what the connections are.
Yeah.
And we can lead conversations in different directions. And I can't see AI being that nuanced.
I think also, though, one of the most powerful things about travel is when you meet other people when you are traveling and start to build up relationships with them. That, to my mind, is one of the sort of essences of travel. Even if it's just the waiter who is very thoughtful and anticipates our every need, or it's the people that we meet at the pool and we find that we get on fantastically well. It's just human connection. And to my mind, that is what is one of the most important parts of travel.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think it can be the reason why you go somewhere. And I've had some of my best experiences at the opposite end of that scale, is just sitting in a coffee shop and watching other people doing their thing.
Watching the world go by, yes.
Yeah, it's a lovely way to observe humanity. Because when you're on holiday, most people are out of their normal environments, and some people cope with it well, and some you can tell that they are well outside of their comfort zones.
Yes.
Well, it's been absolutely fabulous having a chat to you, Anthony. And yes, thank you very much. It's been very interesting putting the world of travel to the rights, and this is what it's all about. And hopefully, our listeners will also think the same.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been extremely enjoyable.
And same to you. It's also been enjoyable too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.